So we know what the Jimmy Butler trade is, and it's happening soon. The Suns made it clear with this move on screen. They traded the only first-round pick that they had available all the way in 2031 to the Jazz for 3 future first-round picks, which is a deal that you only make if you know you have a Butler trade in place. And so I'd expect Jimmy Butler to be traded maybe later today as of the recording of this video, maybe later in the week, whatever the case may be, and this is what it would look like. I know that this looks insane. I know it looks complicated. When the trade does happen, I hope you come back to this channel and watch the videos on it because there's going to be a lot going on and I'm going to break it all down for you. But let's go to what Phoenix needed to have happen that we've talked about in other videos in order to get Jimmy Butler. Step 1, they needed Bradley Beal to waive his no-trade clause. Until that happened, they were not able to trade for Jimmy Butler. There was no salary way to make it work that they could trade for Jimmy Butler and not trade away Bradley Beal, and he can just refuse any trade that they give him. And it seems like because of this move, because they traded a 2031 first, that's the best pick in the deal, for 3 future first-round picks, it tells me that they're confident Bradley Beal will be waiving his no-trade clause, and in this scenario, it would be to go to Milwaukee. Phoenix has been trying to make this happen for a little while. They moved Bradley Beal to the bench. He's clearly not happy. Milwaukee still represents at least a little bit of an opportunity for him to maybe try and go win a title, maybe compete. And if he just wants out of Phoenix, him waiving the no-trade clause is step 1. That unlocks everything else. Step 2. You had to find a team that actually wanted Bradley Beal. There were not very many, if any, options out there in terms of teams that would want Beal, because my assumption was it wouldn't be a contender. It wouldn't be a team like Milwaukee, which we're going to talk about later. It would be a team like Detroit or one of these other teams that would be willing to take on this giant Bradley Beal contract and get some assets, even though they're not particularly interested in Beal as a player. But it seems like, based on reporting, Phoenix has found the team. They have found the team that actually wants Bradley Beal, and that team is Milwaukee, which again opens everything else up. Step 3, they have to find enough assets to get Miami interested in the deal. Just giving up pick swaps or the future 2031 first-round pick for Phoenix was not enough for Miami. They needed more stuff. They're kind of in an interesting situation in terms of their team being ready to compete. Tyler Hero is good, Bam Adebayo is good, but they're not playing well. The Jimmy thing is clearly a distraction, and they don't want to just give up on the season. They want future assets. They want win-now assets, and in that moment, when all this stuff came out, when it was clear that Jimmy wanted to go to Phoenix, the Suns did not have the assets to make that deal work. Now it seems like they do with this pick and this trade framework we're going to talk about. Then lastly, you have to find a team that you can make the salaries work with, because even with the trade that I've shown you, that deal can't happen until some contract stuff gets worked out. And I actually think that based off reporting, based off figuring out this trade myself, this is happening. They have found a way to actually check all 4 of those boxes. Let me once again put the trade on screen for you. Milwaukee gets Bradley Beal and 2 first-round picks. Utah gets the first-round pick from the Suns. That trade has already happened. I just put it in the trade machine here to make it a little bit more simpler, and then they take on some salary. The Suns get Jimmy Butler, and the Miami Heat get Chris Middleton, Bobby Portis, Beauchamp, and a future first-round pick. This one would be from Cleveland, but again, it just goes back to that Suns trade. It's the 3 first-round picks the Suns got in exchange for their own. For Milwaukee, their mindset here is they're ready to move on from the Chris Middleton thing, and they're willing to take a swing on Bradley Beal being the scoring punch that they need. Middleton has had a ton of injury issues over the last couple of years. He hasn't been particularly healthy this season, and they're willing to shake up their roster and make this massive risk of a move by adding Bradley Beal to a backcourt that also already includes Damian Lillard. But I think more importantly, they're trying to get assets and flexibility back on this roster, and that's what they get by getting these 2 first-round picks. I'm going to come back to those 2 first-round picks later, keep that in mind, but that's the mindset for Milwaukee. They basically swap Beal for Middleton along with some other rotation pieces, and they get 2 firsts in exchange. Utah, we already know why they're here. They're part of that Suns trade that has already happened. Awesome, fantastic trade for Utah. Doesn't get any better if you're a Utah fan. Those 3 first-round picks were between Cleveland and Minnesota, and they're all the least favorable of those teams. So you're looking at likely picks in the 20s, and then you get this 2031 first from Phoenix. They might be a catastrophe in 2031. Awesome trade for Utah. Phoenix, we already know what they're doing here. They've been trying to get Jimmy Butler for basically a month at this point. Jimmy gets his wish. He goes to Phoenix, and I don't really know how much that helps their team. Honestly, like, Beal hasn't been that good, but also Butler hasn't been that good. I'm unsure about that fit, but maybe it'll do enough to shake up the roster. Maybe they're able to dump Yusuf Nurkic to a team, get some other assets, get some other pieces on their team. I still don't think Phoenix is going to be very good, but the mindset is very clear and understandable for them in terms of why they want Butler. And then Miami gets Middleton, who isn't necessarily an outstanding outstanding asset, but helps them this season, turns into a big expiring next year. They can figure some things out with him. Bobby Portis is here because Milwaukee has to figure out a way to make all the salaries work, and Bobby Portis had to go somewhere. So I was like, hey, maybe Miami would want Bobby Portis. Beauchamp is there, and then they get that future first as well, whether that be for flexibility, whether they just use the pick in 2027. I just kind of guessed on which years each team would get out of these first-round picks, and that is the reasoning for every single team. Now, there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. Milwaukee cannot do this trade until they get rid of some salary. Milwaukee, as a second apron team, cannot aggregate salaries. It means they can't send out more than one player in a deal at a time while they are over the second apron, which means they need to get rid of some salary. Prior to doing all this, Pat Connaughton is a name that's been thrown out there, someone that would likely go to Detroit. Maybe they send some kind of draft assets or some young player to Detroit to get under the second apron, and then Milwaukee can do this deal. I also mentioned earlier I would go back to those future first round picks for the Bucks. If you're a Bucks fan, this might seem really exciting. You're getting 2 future first round picks. I'm not positive that they'd actually get 2 firsts, because Phoenix might be using one of those firsts to get rid of Jusuf Nurkic, maybe get some players. A team like Portland has been mentioned as a possibility for Nurkic. That is something that we're going to have to just keep an eye on and see if that happens. I gave Milwaukee 2 firsts in this because they're giving up a lot. They're giving up half the rotation and taking on the Beal contract, so I felt like they'd probably get more than 1 first, but maybe they're just that desperate to shake up the roster. But that first could end up as part of a Nurkic deal. The reason Nurkic isn't in this deal for Phoenix is because they are also a second apron team, and just like Milwaukee, they are not able to trade away multiple players in the same trade, so the Nurkic thing would have to happen separately from this deal. And with all those things in place, if they can figure out all of this, Jimmy Butler will end up in Phoenix. Chris Middleton will end up in Miami, where I'd expect him to stay, play out the year in Miami, try and push to compete in the playoffs like they always do. And then Milwaukee ends up with Bradley Beal. There's 2 things here that could potentially hold up the entire trade. One, Beal has to actually waive his no trade clause. I'm assuming that he has agreed to waive his no trade clause, and that's why Phoenix went through with the deal that they did to get the draft picks. There's no way you can convince me that Phoenix is willing to break up that first round pick into 3 others that are not as good unless it helps them facilitate the Butler trade, and you don't make that move unless you're confident that you have the Butler trade basically worked out. And again, that would have to include Bradley Beal saying that he wants to go to Milwaukee. The other thing that holds this up for me is I don't know what the Bucks are doing. I can understand swapping Middleton and Beal and getting 2 first-round picks. That makes total sense to me, even though the Beal contract is a nightmare. Maybe you think it's an even swap. You get some first. You can have some flexibility moving forward with your team. The thing that bugs me is they're giving up 5 players in the deal because of the difference in salary between Middleton and Beal. They make like there's an $18 million gap they have to make up for. That's why Bobby Portis has to be in the deal, Beauchamp, DeLon Wright, Taurean Prince. This could just be Brook Lopez. You could have Brook Lopez go somewhere else, but I'd rather keep Brook Lopez over any of these other guys. And so now Milwaukee's looking at a situation where they're going to be back over the second apron. They can't trade for, or they can't get any buyout guys because they're over the second apron. Their free agency options are very limited. And then you're just giving up half your rotation in order to swap out Middleton for Beal. And yes, you get the first round picks, but that's the part of this that I don't understand. It's not that it won't happen. It's just if you're looking for why won't this happen? Why will this fall apart? It's because Milwaukee doesn't want to give up so many pieces. Again, they can mitigate that by having Brook Lopez be in the deal if you want. That's fine. That's the part that I don't understand. But if the Jimmy Butler trade happens the way that I think it will, that probably going to be this week, this is a structure that I think would make sense. Detroit probably is involved before this, where Pat Connaughton goes to Detroit, and then maybe you'd see Nurkic go somewhere as well with those future first-round picks. But because of the deal that Phoenix made with the picks, and because of all this reporting, all these different things that go into this deal, I think this, or something close to this, is the Jimmy Butler trade.